hot and fast or low and slow? What is the best way to prepare a Texas style brisket on a Kamado Joe? We're gonna find out by doing one of each and put them head to head and see if we can pick a winner. Hey, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue and welcome to a hot and fast versus low and slow Texas style brisket showdown. And this really is a showdown. I've been doing some hot and fast versus low and slow videos with some baby back ribs as well as pulled pork, and low and slow is taking the victory, hot and fast is taking the victory. Today we're gonna find out if brisket is better served hot and fast or low and slow. Now the definition I'm going here is cook time. So for our ribs, hot and fast was 3 hours versus 6 hours for low and slow. With the pulled pork, we are 4 hours versus 16 hours. And our brisket, we're aiming to do our hot and fast at about 10 hours at 270 degrees to 300 degrees Fahrenheit versus our low and slow, we're doing about 20 hours at about 210 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So let me share what we're gonna cover in today's video. We're gonna do a couple things. I'm gonna show you how to set up your Kamado Joe for a low and slow cook, if that's what you're doing for your Texas style brisket, or hot and fast. Then I'm also going to take a couple minutes to explain how we're going to get both briskets with two different methodologies, temperatures, and cook times to finish at the exact same time. So a work back schedule is something that's handy no matter what style or temperature you choose to go for your cook. And that's actually what we're going to get ready to do right now, which is install our meter probes and give our first spray. Our hot and fast brisket has been on for about 3 hours since about 6 a.m. Today, and our low and slow brisket I haven't looked at yet. It's been on since about 8 o'clock last night. So we're gonna spray, insert our probes so we can start getting some data, and then I'll take you backwards. What is this? No, backwards in time yesterday so I can show you how to set up for the low and slow cook, and then rejoin you earlier this morning and show you how we set up for our hot and fast cook. Okay, let's take a look at our Big Joe brisket. All right, looking good. So this has been on just about 13 hours at this point, and I don't see anything too dry. Maybe a little bit here, we'll get some water, but so far so good. So let's go ahead and give this some spray, as well as installing a meter probe. I'm just gonna go for the middle where the flat and the point meet in a thick spot and use that to keep track of our low and slow brisket, and so we can start informing our game plan from here. Okay, let's take a look at our hot and fast brisket. This has only been on about 3 hours and already it looks like it is further along. So let's go ahead and get some spray on this, and again, second verse, same as the first, we'll add a probe. All right, so now that we've got our first spray of the day complete and our probes in, let's go back to yesterday and I'll show you how we're gonna set up for our low and slow cook. So just like I set up for all my cooks, today we're gonna use the Big Joe, and I start with a clean, empty charcoal basket in terms of removing any leftover ash. I'm gonna take a large piece of oak wood and place that in the center and just cover it with any remaining pieces of charcoal that we have before adding some fresh big block. Now this is really important. If you look at about the total ratio here, I'm trying to keep to about a 95 to a 90% at the worst charcoal to wood ratio. If you start to go much over that, you start to get some really unpredictable things happening. When that wood catches fire, your temperatures shoot up or they drop, it makes it harder to control. As well, I find you don't get as clean smoke. So that 95 ratio is a good visual to look at. So that means I can get away with a little bit of a log in our Big Joe, whereas I'll use 1 or 2 pieces in our classic later on. After that, I installed the base of the SloRoller and started our fire. And this is just to make sure that we get some temperature in the dome. And once I started to be able to do the hand test and feel some heat in the ceramic, I then handed the keys over to our I command. So we dropped that in and set our pit up to run at about 210 degrees Fahrenheit using the SloRoller, as well as taking the opportunity to install a drip tray so that we're not getting any bad smoke from fat drippings hitting our SloRoller. Okay, our setup for our hot and fast Texas style brisket is very similar to what I just covered for the low and slow, but it reminds me I didn't mention seasoning. So both briskets I trimmed the exact same way, and I've covered this in more detail in some of my other videos, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it because today is really about the method of hot and fast versus low and slow. But if you're interested in seeing how I trim briskets, go ahead and check out one of the 2 videos I'll link down to below. So just like our low and slow setup, I did the exact same thing on our Kamado Joe Classic, where I start with a clean basket, remove any excess charcoal. I'm gonna use 2 pieces of oak wood for smoke today, place those on the bottom, bury them with some extra charcoal that was left over before adding some fresh big block to help cover those up. Once again, I'm going to start the fire just with the SloRoller base installed until I see 270 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And then I'll take the opportunity to install the top portion of my SloRoller, my drip tray, and the cooking grid so that we are ready to get this on. Now, since the briskets that we're doing, both of these were just, I think, about 15, 16 pounds, and is testing the limits of space in our Kamado Joe Classic 3. So I'm using a V-rack that I've draped the brisket over, and for the first few hours that brisket will shrink up, and eventually we'll be able to fit this no problem. I'll be able to remove it, but that's just a little hack to be able to fit a large brisket on an 18-inch cooking grid. So that's it for our setup. You've now seen how to set up for low and slow, hot and fast. The keys to success here are very much the same, which is control your wood to charcoal smoking ratios, get a good hot clean fire going before installing the rest of your components, let everything stabilize so the smoke is running clear, and then you go ahead and throw on your briskets. Both of them, I should mention, we're doing a Texas style for seasoning, which is just salt, pepper, and I add a little bit of garlic mix in there for good measure. So now that everything's on and set, let's take a minute to talk about our work back schedule. So I want to have these briskets for around 6 o'clock this evening, and I want ideally at least a 2-hour rest. So I want everything to finish around 4 o'clock. So that's how we're getting our 20 hours. We're going to aim to go from 8 o'clock last night to 4 for our low and slow, and from 6 a.m. this morning for our hot and fast, also to that same 4 p.m. deadline. And so what we're going to do is take an opportunity to keep track of the data using our meter probe to see where our internal temperature is. And I like to do that because I know if we do decide to wrap, that I can gain about 20 degrees Fahrenheit per hour with a wrap. So if finishing temperatures need to be about 205 degrees Fahrenheit and I'm at 185 degrees Fahrenheit, I know that I can close that difference in about 1 hour. If I'm at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, I know I need at least 2 hours in a wrap in order to reach that temperature. So that's exactly what I'm going to go into today's plan with, looking at the data as the day wears on to figure out whether or not we have to wrap in order to finish, or if we can let these run as far as possible with no wrap. The other reason that we may want to wrap is if our bark is fully developed and can't take any more smoke without drying out. That will be something that we do. But if I can get away without having to wrap it, I like to get at least well into the 180s on a Kamado style cooker before even thinking about the wrap. I know a lot of experts out there give you the range of 165 degrees, which might be true if you're cooking on a 1,000-gallon offset smoker, which is moving a lot of air. That bark tends to form much earlier. We've got a completely different setup that we're cooking with today, and I found you get much better results around the 180 degree range. Let me know if you want to see in a separate video some more insights on that, as well as direction of fat side up, fat side down. We've got lots to share, some tips and tricks, but I won't be able to fit everything in today's video. So go ahead and let me know in the comments if that's something that you'd like to see. Anyways, I'll keep you updated throughout the day as we go ahead and make some adjustments to temperature based on the data. I'll fill you in if we do that, as well as taking the opportunity to spray these now every 45 minutes or so for the next hour or two as our bark forms, and we'll adjust our game plan and fill you in on any details from here on out. So remember all that work back mumbo jumbo? Well, we're not even 6 hours in, and our hot and fast brisket is starting to look like it's almost done. I've just checked the temperature using a thermopen, and we're in the 190s. So we are less than an hour away, I think, of this being ready to wrap. So much for all that. But I am noticing that our low and slow brisket needs a little help. It's been stuck at a stall in the 145 to 150 range for the last couple hours. Since it's now been on for close to 16 hours, I want to go ahead and bump up that temperature a little bit higher just to make sure that we can get that bark that we want before we need to wrap, because it still looks like that bark needs a little work. So I'm going to increase the temperature on our iCommand to about 250 degrees, still keeping lower and slower territory, and our hot and fast has been again at 270 to 300 degree range. I'll move the camera a little closer as I'm going to take the brisket off of the V-rack now and let it finish flat on the grid so it doesn't have that little curve shape to it when we want to slice into it later on. All right, we're at 7 hours and our hot and fast brisket is done, which means I could have slept in past 5 in the morning. Anyways, time to wrap it and get it in a towel in our cooler and let it rest. And then we're also going to check the bark on our low and slow brisket, see if it's set up enough that we can also wrap it and get it to its final stages to join the hot and fast brisket in the cooler for a couple hours before we slice into them a little closer to dinner. Okay, so on my right is our hot and fast brisket. On my left is our low and slow. And just looking at the two, I can see that the hot and fast brisket has shrunk up a little bit more than our low and slow. Let's go ahead and slice them up, get a few slices from the flat as well as the point, and see if there's any difference in our smoke ring. Okay, let's do some tasting of our flat. Let's start with our low and slow. And so it is very bendy, still holding together. I did rip it a bit, but I can still hold it even if it is pulling apart with the slightest tug. Not as much of a smoke ring on our low and slow. I can just see that already, but let's go ahead and give this a taste. That was really good. We're not going to draw any conclusions yet because we've only sampled one of the flats, but let's take some of our hot and fast and give that a taste test now. I did notice cutting through the hot and fast flat that the bark on the underside was a little overdone, and so the knife was having a hard time without tearing that, but let's see how our flat is on our hot and fast. Okay, so again, no issues with the bend test here on our flat. Also holding together under its own weight and with the slightest tug coming apart. Definitely more pronounced smoke ring. Let's go ahead and see if we can taste any difference. These are closer than the looks suggest, but right now I prefer the caramelly sweet finish that the hot and fast fat cap has as it's rendered out and becomes sort of tacky. It's almost like a burnt end taste on our flat. So it definitely wins on smoke ring, and it definitely wins on the overall taste. I'm getting a little bit more smoke, and I do prefer the bark on this one, even though the underside of our hot and fast is a little bit overdone. Let's go ahead and get a couple slices out of our point end and see how that does. So let's start with our low and slow. So definitely a bit better smoke ring on the point end, and it's holding together under its own weight, although it feels like it might give out any second. I'll just take a little smaller piece. That is really good. Definitely liking the point even more than a flat end that I think we cooked perfectly. Let's try our hot and fast. And again, holding under its own weight and a more pronounced smoke ring versus our low and slow. Don't know if that's coming through on camera or not, This one though does feel different. It has like a molasses tackiness to it, the sticky sort of fat rendering out that I like. Let's go ahead and I'll take a slice from the same end. All I'm gonna say right now is wow. I'll meet you outside to unpack the differences between our two briskets and the key takeaways from today's experiment. All right, I join you back outside for two reasons. First, we're not quite done with our brisket. I was able to slice up some extra point meat and cube that up for some burnt ends. So I've got those back on a foil pan with some barbecue sauce for about another 60 to 90 minutes. So we're gonna have some burnt ends to go with dinner, but also to do our recap. So in terms of victory, who won? Well, if it wasn't for that bottom crust on the Kamado Joe Classic 3 where we went hot and fast, the hot and fast was a hands down winner. The smoke ring was better, the bark was better, the texture and the caramelization of the fat in terms of how it rendered out was better. I forgot something there in terms of the bark, flavor, taste, smoke ring, etc. Everything except that bottom piece where it was a little bit overdone was better. Now, why did that happen? So in order to get this big brisket, we had to use our, drape it over a pan, and I couldn't get that to fit without being down a level. So we lost our air gap in terms of being above the SloRoller, and we were practically sitting right on it. So if I were to do this again on a Kamado Joe Classic, even though I think that 270 degrees is hands down the best temperature, I would either get a smaller brisket so I could do 270 up higher, or drop it down to that 250 range. So you still get some of those same benefits. In terms of our low and slow brisket, this is not a bad brisket, but today it just comes a little bit short. It was moist, juicy, passed the the bend test, the pull test, and the taste test. But the whole family inside, when we did the little blind taste test, everybody picked hot and fast for the flavor. So there's just no getting around that hot and fast is better on a Kamado. So why is that? So my theory on this is if we were using Aaron Franklin's 1,000-gallon drum smoker that moves a lot of air, the way and method that he shares would work perfectly. The uniqueness of the Kamado is it retains a lot of heat and it just doesn't get great airflow below 220 degrees. I think that's what showed up in our low and slow brisket. The bark wasn't as good, the smoke ring wasn't as prevalent, and the fat just didn't render out as well. And I think that's because we're, getting a cooker and then tying one arm behind the back. We're not taking advantage of the SloRoller, which helps promote 20 times better airflow because we've got such a small burning fire and are able to maintain that temperature with relatively little burn. We're also not taking full advantage of the infrared heat source that a heat-soaked ceramic dome provides. And so all of these things sort of come together once we get north of 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The SloRoller starts to sing, you get clean combustion, good charcoal taste, good wood smoke if you've added that, and the infrared or radiant heat, from the ceramic helps just cook your food that much quicker. So hope you really enjoyed this video. I sure enjoyed doing the experiment where we put a brisket on last night at 8, one first thing this morning at 6, and who knew that it would be without a doubt the same day brisket that by all measurable accounts, with one exception of the bottom, was hands down much, much better. So moving forward, that's absolutely what I'm going to be doing, except maybe on the Big Joe where I can have that extra air clearance and not have any problems slicing through it. Anyways, that's a wrap for today. I hope you really enjoyed today's video. If you did, please let YouTube know by smashing that thumbs up button, and let me know by hitting subscribe to catch future videos. Until next time, I'm James from Smokin' Dad Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.